Yeah, we're at the J. Challenging as this time is, right? Wait a minute. Where is everybody? Sorry. I guess that's what passes for my humor during the pandemic. Just masking disappointment. In this case, the disappointing necessity that on this year's Days of Awe, we are neither at the Chase nor at the JCC. Instead, we are bringing in 5781 each in our own separate homes. I really wish that we could all be together. And it's hard to believe it's been 6 whole months since our lives dramatically narrowed back in March. Everybody has their own story of the last few days of semi normalcy before everything changed. So for me, the countdown, I guess, starts on Sunday, March 8th, which was our Purim Carnival. And then the next evening, Monday, was our Purim Megillah reading celebration. And we had lots of people at the synagogue. As it turns out, those were the last two events that we held at CRC before the quarantine. And though there were just a really a handful of cases, if that, in St. Louis and even statewide, most of us were cognizant of the virus in sort of a far away, still kind of way. But we, there were a lot of the elbow bumps, a way of physically connecting in a way that, people thought maybe was safer. But, still lots of hugs still at that time. And then on Wednesday night, I came here where I'm making this video. I came here to the Broadway Oyster Bar in downtown St. Louis. I had plans to be with friends and have dinner and see a band. It was actually a Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young cover band. And again, I think everyone was becoming more aware of what was happening with the virus. And still there was still a sense of normalcy. Music was playing, and the sort of communal experience that is shared with live music, felt like it always felt. Then on Thursday, March 12th, that evening I had two bar mitzvah rehearsals with two wonderful young people getting ready for their bar mitzvahs. That same evening, the board of CRC was meeting, and when I called Amy Gage to check in, she told me that in fact the board had voted that night to close the synagogue. And so, of course, those bar mitzvahs were both rescheduled. And then in just a day or two, almost all of Missouri, including the schools and businesses, shut down. We sheltered in place. Most everything just seemed to stop all at once. Suddenly, time became jagged instead of moving forward like it always did before. Anxiety and near-apocalyptic paranoia descended. On that first night, I pulled out my home guitar, the one I've had since middle school. I put on my old fringed jacket. I was searching for creature comforts. And I made a video of Hashkivenu to post on Facebook, desperate to reach out and communicate to others and myself that I was still here, that we could still somehow be together, socially distant perhaps, but not socially isolated. I sang "Everything's Gonna Be All Right," and even though I always believe it when I sing it, a little part of me, I have to admit, in that moment felt like all bets were off. I did feel blessed to be able to huddle close to my family as our worlds narrowed. We learned new terms like flatten the curve. We used words we knew but thought were reserved for scientists and science fiction like pandemic. And we even dug up a chestnut I thought was only used in the Torah for the antiquated and outmoded laws of dealing with leprosy, quarantine. We'll be back to normal by the summer, I told my family and I told myself. Yet here we are, 6 months later. The handful of cases in March have turned into millions, and hundreds of thousands of people have died, struggling to breathe and often alone. We are living through countless disruptions and disappointments, missing pleasures we didn't realize we might not always have. There has been a transformation from what we thought was normal to forms of that are still unrecognizable. Our work, our kids' schools, our families' social and cultural lives, our finances, our economy, our health, travel plans, our very psyches. This is monumental. It's stunning. Frontline workers from every walk of life risk everything just to go about their day. When we are near anybody not in our bubble, be they friend, family member, or stranger, we must maneuver to stay away from them for fear that they will give the virus to us or that we will give it to them. Instead of trust and connection, there is a need for wariness of others and keeping our distance from them. I wonder what attitude cues our youngest children are picking up as we try to keep them safe. Community, which makes society loom so large in our hearts and our minds, is now reduced to screens. The reality of touch, for now, replaced by virtual images. While there are always individuals and families who go through traumas which turn their lives upside down for significant amounts of time, and whole societies, including ours, have had events that interrupt normalcy for months or even years, none of us have ever before witnessed an event like this that impacts nearly everyone on Earth for such an extended duration and counting. My life up to now, like yours, has been cruising along, punctuated by ups and downs, the occasional high drama. I guess I just expected more of the same until I was through. I figured the world wars were in the rear view before I was born, and it looked like, unfortunately, some climate change disaster might wreak havoc after I died. But here we are now, living through this Great Depression-like stretch of history. Most everything, it seems, is up in the air, like we're in a movie, but we don't know the ending. But when I start going down that road too long, I check myself. Because for sure, events throughout history have thrown people hardships far worse than what we're going through, what most of us are going through. This altered rhythm of life due to the quarantine has even given many of us blessings, unexpected blessings, including for me the unexpected increase in time spent with my adult children. Is some of what I am feeling a result of simply getting too used to all my comforts and getting too used to the smorgasbord of activities, events, and opportunities that were part of contemporary life? For me, at least, there is this jarring tension between overstating what is happening and understating it, and I'm constantly toggling between the two. There are so many pieces of life at this time that are so heartbreaking. Until I went to Chicago a few weeks ago to attend a family funeral, I hadn't been able to see my 80-year-old parents since December. Gabe's freshman and Zoe's senior year in college are utterly unrecognizable. Amy and I can't celebrate the high holidays with all of you as we have joyfully for the past 20 years. Everybody has their own tales of woe. For people at every stage of life, there is at least one, usually more, important thing that is not how it ought to be. I ache, for example, for kindergartners trying to learn online when they are so eager for learning and interaction, but also for elders who must be even more isolated than the rest of us at a time when they so badly need human reassurance. The palette of life has dimmed. We miss the richness and fullness of what we used to know. We have been humbled by this virus, surrendering more control than we are used to. And yet, we're here. We are pretty adaptable, aren't we? Truth is, despite the singularity of this historical moment, some normalcy has crept into this emergency. Inwardly, most of us just can't keep up a constant state of alarm for so long. And so though the virus is worse now than it was in the spring, we try to recalibrate. We almost have no choice but to recalibrate how we're feeling about it. Outwardly, well, for starters, I don't know about you, but I stopped wearing these ridiculous gloves I obsessively used whenever I ventured out back in April. Most of us thankfully have figured out how, within the restrictions, to keep going, mind, body, and spirit. And all that we are going through, and it is a lot. It is a huge challenge, but it is mitigated by the knowledge that it is all for the common good, for public health, to keep one another safe, to help minimize illness, to save lives. So I'd like to offer up the image of a Havdalah candle, even though it's Friday night. The traditional ceremony that bids farewell to Shabbat and greets the rest of the week, Havdalah, speaks about the separation between Chodesh, holy or extraordinary, and Chol, which is secular or ordinary. However, the candle, the main symbol of Havdalah, belies the idea that Chodesh and Chol are utterly walled off from each other. The candle, you see, is braided, twisted, suggesting that what is holy and what is considered ordinary are actually fluid, more likely to blend into one another than to remain distinct. Though this time we are living through is incredibly challenging, it certainly is extraordinary. At the same time, as I said, a bit of the ordinary has wound its way back into life as we now know it. And it works the other way as well. As much as all of us, desperately await a return to the life we were used to, there are aspects born from and fueled by this extraordinary time of pandemic and quarantine that will hopefully blend into the future when ordinary finally returns. Crucially, for example, I'm thinking of the heightened consciousness around Black Lives Matter. As someone who was in Ferguson almost every night for months in 2014, but who spent this summer of protests observing from the sidelines, it was obvious to me that the involvement was deeper, wider, and yes, whiter this time around. The summer of COVID is also the season that the movement became mainstream. Part of the reason was clearly the sheer brutality of George Floyd's death. But sadly, there have been shocking cases before. Tamir Rice, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, to name just a few. I believe the pandemic is playing a major role. These last few months, when we all feel so vulnerable, there is heightened sensitivity for people who are afraid, who are victimized, who are vulnerable, even when there isn't a virus hunting them down. And because we are all paying such close attention to everything pandemic, everything COVID-19, we cannot ignore that those who are already disadvantaged and oppressed, overwhelmingly people who are poor, black, and brown, they are being disproportionately harmed by this virus. More illness and death, more economic and educational pain. Those with privilege and more resources, while certainly affected by COVID and its endless ramifications, are still able to soften the blow. Because we all feel on the edge right now, we can relate more easily to the demand coming from the streets that it is now or never for social changes that should have come at least a generation ago. Thus, the pandemic itself is highlighting inequality and seems to be forcing a true reckoning. And I pray going back to normal will not include turning away from this new commitment to finally doing the work to dismantle racism. Roman Krznaric is known as a public philosopher. Good gig if you can get it. His latest book is called The Good Ancestor. His message would be familiar to those of us who have been listening to Rabbi Susan over all these years. Basically, he says that we have tremendous responsibilities as the eventual ancestors of children not yet born, an obligation to them to not fall prey to what he calls short-termism. Instead of thinking only of our own generation, Krasnarek teaches we need to live by what he calls cathedral thinking, laying the groundwork of preparation for events like pandemics that might not come around for centuries. We should start building, even though we may not see it finished, though we will surely not be the ones that benefit from it. In other words, can our time living with this virus push us to do for our descendants in the future what our ancestors in the past often failed to do for us? In quarantine, I've been reflecting on a song by the rock band U2 and their songwriter Bono called 13 There Is a Light. It is a newer song, and though it just predates COVID, it is teaching me a great deal about the moment we find ourselves in. I imagine Bono wrote this song 13 for his young adult children, who, like us all right now, are struggling with a world that even before coronavirus, even before the quarantine, a world that just seems done. He urges them to keep a sliver of the hope and idealism of their childhood, to maintain a softness even while so much hardens around them. Are you tough enough to be kind? Do you know your heart has its own mind? Our kids would not believe us if we tried to tell them that there is no cruelty, there are no disappointments. They certainly wouldn't believe it if we tried to tell them that now. But maybe they would understand if we said that darkness gathers around the light, that we only know the situation is awful right now because righteousness and truth exists. It exists as a contrast. Like the braided Havdalah candle illustrates, the bleakness soon twists around to reveal goodness, even if for now that goodness is barely detected. Hope is not walled off, is not separate from despair. Each of those are wound up in the other. Hold on, hold on. Bono sings that this is a song for someone like his kids. But he also acknowledges he needs it as well. And so he adds someone like me. The world is far from ideal these days. But that very realization should remove any doubt that there is a light. Don't let it go out.
I know the world is done, but you don't have to be. I've got a question for the child in you before it leaves. Are you tough enough to be kind? Do you know your heart has its own mind? Darkness gathers around the light. Hold on, there is a light we can't always see. If there is a world we can't always be. If there is a dark, then we shouldn't doubt that there is a light. Don't let it go out. And this is a song for someone like you, someone like me, someone like you.
May we have the compassion to help each other through this pandemic and not turn away from all the sickness, risk, loss, and human costs we all are facing. May we have the wisdom to safely weave some normalcy, though, into our strange new circumstance. And may we have the strength to blend the difficult truths we have learned from this unprecedented period into shaping a post-pandemic future, back to normal with major improvements. And finally, may we emerge into that renewed time, a restored faith, our unity and community is repaired, and into a new year, 5781, a year of peace and blessing. I always wanted to have a gospel amen choir punctuate one of my sermons. Sometimes this format surprises us. I love and I miss you all. I am still trying to throw my arms around the whole world. Lishana Tova to you and yours. Please stay well. Shalom.